Great, hello and welcome to our monthly WFO webinar. My name is Ilya Kranouhov and I'm the Development Manager at the World Forum Offshore Wind. Today's webinar in Offshore Wind Development Challenges, and it's my great pleasure to welcome our two excellent speakers for today. Usually we have three speakers, but unfortunately time and homework from Bliss Consultancy had some health emergency, and we only have two speakers. Nevertheless, while wishing good health to Timon, we still have two outstanding speakers. We have Hulm from Renewable Risk Advisors and Felix Fischer from Chatham Partners. And before we jump into the presentation, let me tell you a few things about WFO. So the organization founded in 2018, and we're a non-profit entity focused on promoting offshore wind energy only. We represent, our members represent the complete offshore wind value chain, and we have an international setup with offices in Hamburg, Tokyo, Taipei, and New York. In terms of our activities, it's very straightforward as we focus on three things only. We provide advisory services for the global offshore wind community around the world. We inform about offshore wind via various media channels, and we organize events for connection to the global offshore wind community, such as this one, webinars. We also have workshops, members-only events, networking events, and so on. In terms of our members, as you can see on this slide, we have over 85 members at the moment, and they represent all segments of the value chain from North America, Europe, Asia, Oceania, including Australia. And if somehow you are still not a member of WFO, please make sure to join us. You feel free to check our website, contact Gunnar Hersik, our Manager Director, and if you have any question regarding the membership, please do not hesitate to reach us. And now a couple of words about the structure of this webinar, which is actually very simple. And during the first part of the webinar, our two speakers will present on their topics, and then we have a time for Q&A session. And for the Q&A session, please use this panel on the right-hand side, and you can use the chat function to insert your questions there, and I will read it after both speakers present. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ilya. I'm just going through the process of showing my screen. Yeah, so you should be able to see the vessel. So hi, my name is Joe Hulm, presenting on behalf of Renewable Risk Advisors. Our founding director, Michael Bullock, also contributed towards these slides, and you'll have both of our contact details at the end on the final slide. So on development challenges, we're discussing how finance and insurance can actually stifle innovation. So an introduction as to who we are. So we're a specialist risk management and insurance claim consultancy with experience across all fuel types, but in particular offshore wind, wave, and tidal, and the innovations that involves. We are a team of about 6, and Michael Bullock, the founding director, I joined about 18 months ago. Michael's been an insurance broker for most of his career, and also an offshore risk consultant prior to founding Renewable Risk. I myself am a former project developer with International Power, now part of the NG Group, and also Blue Water offshore, Blue Water Energy Services in FPSO world. So I was a merchant navy officer in my first career, and I came into insurance as a loss adjuster with Lloyd Warwick. I joined Renewable Risk about 18 months ago. So what we do, there are 3 main aspects to our business. Alternative risk strategies, we're funded by a combination of EU and UK research institutions to look into some of the challenges that we're about to raise really in these slides and perhaps discuss afterwards. The cascading effect of insurability on bankability, and how the innovation pathway can find a challenge in this financial architecture. And we're seeking and establishing alternative insurance mechanisms to help address this. We'll come to this at the end of the presentation. Strategic risk and insurance advisory is really assisting the insured projects out there, either with their own insurance requirements or advising them alongside their own broker in terms of the specific wordings of their insurance risk transfer. And then finally, post-loss advisory, which is the the aspect that I lead as Director of Post-Loss Advisory, is really claims, insurance claims, and as a former loss adjuster, assisting projects through the adjustment process, whereby they have to fight their corner to secure their money for the insurance company as quickly as possible, and we assist in that regard. An example of some work that we're doing parallel is with the UK's offshore renewable energy catapult, and this is with regard to floating offshore wind. The project partners that are co-funding the offshore Centre of Excellence for Floating Offshore Wind are listed there on the screen, and we have the brief to investigate the insurance challenges to floating offshore wind in particular, and to tie this up with a separate work on the project finance challenges conducted by another party. So this is an example of the arena that we work in at a strategic level. So stifling innovation, you could say colloquially, the men in suits from finance and also from insurance. How can they present a challenge to this technical development? Well, there are three aspects here: warranties, insurance, and certification. So the bankable warranties are a requirement of lenders, and it's often that a technology supplier, be that in floating, for example, could be the foundation as well as the turbine, needs to be a big tier one supplier that can provide a warranty for the first X number of years before the risk transfer provided by insurance policy can kick in. On the insurance side, the requirement is for broad insurance cover is increasingly difficult, as it is with warranties. So the requirements of lenders is often not met either by the large OEMs. Well, it can be by the large OEMs, but the smaller technology developers have difficulty meeting the requirements to warranty of lenders. And likewise with insurance, the insurance market has hardened significantly over the past 5 to 6 years. And there is a significant variation between insurers themselves as to what constitutes proven technology. And this can mean that placing the insurance, i.e. buying insurance and organising risk transfer, is even more complicated with innovative technology, because different insurance companies have different opinions on what is proven and what level of breadth of insurance coverage can be provided. So this means that insurers have their risk engineers take a keen view on the QA/QC procedures within an emerging technology. And then finally, certification. This is really the stamp of approval from certification bodies, and that there's an element here of familiarity. So, for example, in subsea tidal turbines, many of the turbines that are fixed to the seabed develop a three-blade approach, like a wind turbine, less so for sort of technical reasons, but more for familiarity. So that certification and therefore confidence with insurers and indeed lenders can be obtained. And this applies to both type certification and ideally to project certification as well. So familiarity is important, and ultimately these three aspects, warranties, insurance and certification, can be quite blunt instruments and can actually stifle innovation and pause the innovation pathway for up to 5 years, and we'll come on to that in the later slides as to why that is. So just to recap here on where we are, what do we mean by technical or commercial readiness? At the top you've got the in blue research, development, demonstration and deployment. So these are the 4 recognised phases of a rollout of emerging technology through to commercial scale. Towards the right of that axis you have competitive commercial. And the thing to bear in mind here is that many engineers developing technology refer to the technology readiness level, the TRL, that was first developed by NASA, where TRL 9 is ready for commercial scale. But I think the important thing to consider is that there's such thing as a commercial readiness index that was first developed by the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, where they go beyond that of TRL 9 towards what they call CRI 6, which is essentially bankability. There's a further slide here that gives more detail. If you look at in the blue, column, the CRI6, Commercial Readiness Index 6, bankable asset class. And that's where we need to work backwards from when pulling emerging technology through the market, not just to 209, but to its insurability and ultimately bankability. And just kind of work back down that process. If it's insurable, then it has a cascading effect on being more bankable, and enhanced bankability leverages a project more project finance, meaning that the available equity IRR, internal rate of return, is increased, therefore making a project more investable. So insurable, bankable, investable. That's the cascading effect we seek to foster. However, easier said than done with emerging technology. So how do we get to what the bankers want? Well, the old maxim is that it's bankable when it's bankable. Bit of a chicken and egg situation there. And as I mentioned before, there's a cascading effect of insurability on bankability to enhance investment, particularly with regards to loss of revenue insurance, where through business interruption cover, any outages of a power generating asset can be covered off through a claim on insurance to satisfy lenders that they're going to get their debt serviced. And it's that confidence, in particular, the confidence of the lender's insurance advisor, that must be obtained in order to secure project finance. So certification, as we've touched on before, is particularly important, and it's often that operating hours of a year, that's about 8,000 hours, are required for the exact same specification of technology. So this means that there's quite an onerous process to go through to obtain type certification, and even more so project certification. This wet testing in the offshore environment is obviously never cheap, and but the more important aspect here is that if you seek to apply your certification, having paid handsomely for it, innovation often has to be paused throughout that period. And as touched on, certification requires sea trials for offshore wind and certainly for floating as well as fixed. And this has three aspects to it. It's very expensive, and there are limited opportunities, and then opportunities for co-location as well can be constrained. So the trial deployments need finance and insurance themselves in order to deploy in a test centre, and there's obviously a constraint there because nobody's done it before. And there are limited opportunities to deploy in other locations where you're sharing a location, sharing an asset, a seabed asset, and there's a risk of compounding one innovation over another, where maybe you're testing a new type of turbine with a new type of platform, and even co-location with non-renewable projects such as hydrocarbons brings into bear various challenges through third-party liability and indemnity cover. So it's not easy. That's the message really, in terms of bringing innovation through the process required to obtain certification in order to get the breadth of insurance coverage you need to satisfy the lenders that they're going to provide project finance for a commercial project. So what's the answer? Well, I mean, for a new technology, it's going to still most likely require that 8,000 hours on the clock of demonstration, and the agreement from test sites and such like, it must be obtained, and the proven model approach can delay the final investment decision by perhaps 18 to 24 months. So if you're going through this wet testing, for which you have to obtain a basic level of insurance cover anyway in its own right, by the time you get through to deploying your commercial project, in order to satisfy the requirements of the various men in suits in the insurance world and in the finance world, it could be that your original technology product is 5 years old before you've actually deployed it at commercial scale with project finance. So this is the real challenge to innovation when being pulled through the market under the financial architecture of both insurance and banking. So, are there alternative solutions? Well, The first two don't sound very attractive: less insurance or more expensive debt. Projects can opt for technology without the full level of certification and therefore desired insurance cover. So you're taking the risk yourself. This is obviously suboptimal and would probably result in inability to secure project finance. You'd need a lot of balance sheet equity finance to get you to sufficient scale to demonstrate your technology. In terms of more expensive debt, it's essentially an effect on the cost of capital. The challenge here is not just the cost of insurance, it's the cost of capital. And lenders will have their own onerous requirements in terms of contingency funds and perhaps costly risk mitigating measures if they're going to lend to a project that hasn't met the above mentioned requirements. So one approach to this is the role of an entrepreneurial state. Perhaps given the market failure of insurance in being such a hard market that it's not really geared up to supporting innovation all the way through to commercialization and bankability, we advocate that there's a role for the state, be that UK, EU or elsewhere, to develop a potential for publicly guaranteed structure, build the gaps between financial requirements and commercial insurance availability. So fill the gap between what the bankers need and what the insurers can provide. And this could also facilitate a standardization, as we've seen recently in the London market through the MWS role, a standardization of a minimum qualification period among insurers, so there can be more consistency in insurance companies' approach towards the emerging technologies that we all need to see. So that starts to conclude. Really, the final thing to say is to say thank you for your attention. I welcome any questions. You've got my details up there, as well as Michael Bullock, our founding director, and look forward to the following presentation.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Joe, for this very comprehensive overview of the financial development innovations. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our next and final speaker for today, webinar Felix Fischer. Felix, over to you.
So yeah, glad to be back. I think it's my second gig here on the development challenges, and I have chosen a similar theme from a different angle, challenges of scale. First, to me, I am a lawyer here in Hamburg working on a lot of offshore wind development. We are specifically not only focusing on transactions and the realization of the value that that is created, but also the trying to really support in bidding processes and then subsequent permitting and questions around all sorts of regulation and contracting for development projects. I've been in the offshore wind industry for 15 years, started my career at Freshfields very early, with a lot of exposure to the then beginning and early days and heydays of offshore here in Germany, with a lot of very exciting projects, and was then able to start this firm Chatham Partners with a couple of other partners 6 years ago. And I'm heading the energy team here. We are currently a team of 8 core energy lawyers, and we have also an EU competition and real estate and those kinds of other sector groups that support in the energy development. The real estate offshore is not so much in demand. Anyway, that to us and to myself, but now to the exciting stuff, the development challenges. I'll skip the introduction in this case, or the content, and go right in. I think what's interesting, and it's already in the headline that I'm presenting today, is really the incredible scaling up that has a new dynamic, as you can say, at the or as everybody can see, that goes for going from bottom to top for Germany to the EU and globally. And I think some of the challenges are very much related. So forgive me if I focus a little bit on European and German examples every now and then, but I think a lot of this can actually be translated to other markets as well, obviously. But if we see what has recently been announced, for example, and I'm just picking this out, on 18th May is combined targets for Belgium, Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands of 65 gigawatt. So that's only a few of the European nations. That's by 2030, by the way, here coming together to try and create a joint approach. It's something that we discussed in the last presentation that I had also, that's very desirable to look at the EEZ, where a lot of countries are bordering each other in a more sort of holistic way, but that actually now still excludes UK. This excludes plans in Norway, for example. So this is only a fraction again of what is planned there, but it is a significant number. I mean, 65 gigawatt by 2030 is a lot. 150 by 2050, and the individual targets, you can see that here. Belgium 5.8 gigawatt, Denmark at least 10, Germany at least 30, and Netherlands 21, and all of that is by 2030. We can also look at the sorry, no, the slide's not changing. Okay, you can also look at the global picture here. That's from the WFO's report. It's a steep curve. I've shown that slide before. And what's I think particularly new also is now a look at the infrastructure that takes, not only at the energy production capacities, but also at ideas of how to use this in an optimized way, and that entails cross-border infrastructure and energy islands that are coming more and more into the discussion. For example, and the idea, as you will all know, is to have hubs offshore where electricity transformation infrastructure can be kept, where potentially electrolysis can be undertaken, so H2 production can be included, and there can also be service hubs for offshore wind production that is far out. So that's the idea: go further out, bring more of the infrastructure there to reduce cost, and then use these infrastructures really as hubs to distribute the product not only to one jurisdiction but to further countries. For example, there's a cooperation between Belgium and Energy, so to connect the Danish energy island to the Belgium clusters. Then there is a project, Bornholm Energy Island in the Baltic Sea, which includes also interconnection both to Denmark and Germany. And then there is now the four players that we just announced, the four countries that we just mentioned, that announced that they wanted to produce project multiple energy islands. So the whole EEZ should be connected. There's the discussion about this meshed offshore grid that does that, and I think that's also a very relevant development, and we'll see in a second why for the scaling up. So obviously there's a lot of opportunity in that. If you're in the industry, you probably had sadder days or days where the phone rang less. It's really getting crowded, but it's also getting busy. So it's obvious that there is opportunity for all sorts of actors to provide their services and infrastructures here and products into that industry. There could be synergies between infrastructures that are in different countries, but also that already exist, and to think about that in a new way is something that is an opportunity now. And then also the inclusion of flexibilization opportunities like hydrogen is something that again is a new field, a new market, and certainly something that a lot of you are already looking at. So a lot of opportunity. The challenges, this is also a slide I've reused. I don't expect you to see the new element that I've included here. So last time we spoke a little bit about the space, the question of how, especially also from a nature protection perspective today, all these other challenges are, and you can't say the one is more important than the other, they're all equally important. We've also got the supply chain issue, how will those volumes be produced? What about local content? We've got regulation that needs to follow, especially when you were looking at those international infrastructures, where we certainly need to see a lot more incentives and other forms of regulation coming. That also goes for the H2. We've got the grid infrastructure as a challenge, certainly to provide cost-effective solutions to get all that power into the markets. Human resources, that's all of you and us here, but there aren't enough of us, which is a good thing for us, but not for the industry. And then there is, I think, the new element that I included is a valuation element that I want to get to in a second, where we think that it's quite difficult at the moment to really say what is a kilowatt hour of offshore wind electricity actually going to be worth in 2030, in 2035, and so on. And we'll dip into that a bit further. Exactly. So the three points that we want to focus on are really the supply chain, the valuation of the product, and the cross-border trading and regulatory framework, which you could put under that infrastructure headline, that are particularly interesting at the moment. All of them equally important, but something that we've thought about in the past few months. So the one point is really the supply chain issue, and I don't want to go too deep into this. I just want to bring it up because all of you will be aware of that, but I just want to give an example of how severe it is. If you look at these two slides that are copy-pasted into this one, it's from a presentation that we have on the build-out and plans in Germany. And if you look at there, in the first column, you see the tender years. So those are the tenders between 2023 and 2026, which have the red circles. And then you have the construction years behind that in the next column. And there you will see that of the volumes tendered in 2023, 7 gigawatt are foreseen for connection in 2030. And then you have in 2024 tenders for 8.5 gigawatt. The largest share of that is scheduled or earmarked for construction in 2029, and then a little bit in 2031. And then there's going to be further tenders of about 2.5 gigawatt in 2025, and they are earmarked for construction in 2030 as well. So, and then there's another 3.5 gigawatt that should be constructed by 2031, and the tender will be in 24, 26, whatever. So, but altogether, there is 21.5 gigawatt in Germany alone crunched into this year's construction years 2029 and 2031. And a lot of people that I hear, and I'm a lawyer, I don't really know, are laughing at that and saying, look, it's never going to help. It's never going to work. The supply chain will not be there now. I'm not the one to comment on that. Maybe it will, but at least it's a lot, and that's a challenge. And the same goes obviously also for the grid infrastructure, which we need to offtake that. If we look at the development or the lead times for that, in a very optimistic scenario, I think 5 years, but it's more realistically 6 or 7. Then we've got 2022 now, so. It's already getting hot. And the other question is obviously then in the current environment, the commodity price development. If we're looking at a tender in 2023 for a project to be realized in 2030, that is the first point also that if you look at the bottom-up calculation of how to enter this bid and how to value your product, what assumptions can you take on that now really, and how bullish can you be about an electricity price in 2030? Not for me to say, I'm just the lawyer, but it seems like a complicated thought process that. And then the question is, if that is all true, what is the impact really on cost and timeline? That's the bottom line question. Which of these projects will really be realized in 2029, 2030, 2031? If we don't hold that timeline, when will that be? And what impact would that have on a bid in a process like that, or on everybody that is somehow indirectly involved in this industry and in these projects? So that's a very important point. Very difficult to say at the moment, probably, what the real cost and the real timeline will be of these projects. And now we come to the other side. So if you look at a really purely cost base, look on how much do you need, what price per kilowatt hour do you need to build this, then you come to the second question. Now, some of the projects, at least in Germany, will be in a CFD model where you can probably pinpoint a price or know what you will get. Then you might only have that cost issue when you're looking at your bid and at your calculation there. But there's a lot of market projects also, and for them the challenges, I think, are even bigger because there are, particularly in the PPA structures, in the flexibilization element that is coming, and in these cross-border infrastructures. There are a lot of black boxes on the question of how much is a kilowatt hour that is produced in the German EEZ in 2030 going to be worth, and what is that going to be worth in 2035. So the first point is what we are seeing is if we scale up in that capacity, how is a pay as produced PPA going to be valued in 2030 or beginning 2030 and in the years to follow? Because with that build out, we will necessarily see a decrease of the specific offshore specific electricity price. So if the wind blows in the German or in the EEZ here in the North Sea, then the prices need to be lower. They need to come down. We are talking about this duck curve that we see in all sorts of industries, certainly going to happen if that build out happens. But does it happen? So for the valuation, the first question really is, will I still be able to sail in a simple pay as produced, or what will be the value in a simple pay as produced PPA? And when is this duck curve going to happen? Because the spot prices certainly are going to come down, and how is that going to be seen by the industry? And do we not need to offer more complex and more sophisticated electricity products to have the most competitive bid in those bidding processes that are coming up? That's the first question that I was thinking about. Okay, so what about the pay as produced? What about alternatives? Which of these models is going to make the race in the bidding processes? The second question is probably is very closely related to that, like what flexibilization opportunities will one have? How far further down the value chain can you go in including or incorporating batteries, flexibilizing your output, or in providing value enhancements of some form by having electrolyzers introduced or included, so to at very low price times produce an alternative product, and then and thereby enhancing the value of the product. But those are adding now to the complexities of thinking about the pure trading element of this. Is now the question, okay, where will technology or where will projects be at that point in time? How will that be considered in the market? How much buildup is going to be altogether there? Everybody that does price forecasts has an opinion on that, but how do you do that when you submit a bid now for something that's so far in the future? And then you have the cross-border element, which adds to that. So now, if all these markets are interconnected, if say you have basically the markets in Denmark, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, just to take these four as an offtake market, how does that impact the value of your product, and how optimistic can you be about that? And there's always obviously this big problem of saying, okay, how optimistic can you be about that when you submit a bid, and how big is the risk that you're taking then to the build out actually happening that that one is expecting? So those two infrastructure components of adding flexibilization assets and cross-border interconnectors and that kind of stuff are very relevant. And on the and that's why I am really puzzled by the ability of people and players to put a price tag on these bids, say in 2023 for 2030, especially because the scaling up in itself provides for a market dynamic that will make all estimates for that build out for a pricing at this point in time even much harder than in a more linear and more predictable growth. So, and the last point is, and it plays into that again, just to show some uncertainties that we as lawyers also can comment on a little bit of these cross-border infrastructure. So we are seeing first interconnector projects and more being planned and possibly coming to the market. But already there, the question of the remuneration model and how these will be used and how they will be introduced in the market is difficult to say. So who is going to build those energy islands and their infrastructure, and then how are the TSOs and the grid operators or private operators potentially in the case of H2 pipelines, how are these going to be built? Who is going to build these, and what is the regulatory model underlying that is probably one of the big questions that one has to ask when one thinks about these being potentially available in 2030. So is that realistic, and what model is going to enable that, and who will be that? Because if you now put a bet on that, you want to know who will be responsible for building these, and how reliable is that? And that's so that is maybe this market mobilization and the point framework for the infrastructure providers of the grid infrastructure and the energy island infrastructure, or whatever is going to be there. That's an interesting question for that. And for offshore wind farms and their developers and operators, obviously, the question is, okay, what remuneration model will apply? That's still relatively simple to say. If you are looking at the German development, where there is a specific, maybe for the CFD projects, there is a mechanism there. But if you are going for a market-based product, then your question might apply not only what is my model in Germany, but if you want to capitalize on saying, okay, I'm not that pessimistic about intermittency because I expect that I can also push this into another market, then the question is, what does that do to your remuneration? Because obviously the subsidies or the market premium in Germany and also providing the grid infrastructure from the German side, I don't know if there is some there's some expectance to enhance also that this will be delivered into a specific market. Under what circumstances can you then trade elsewhere, or do you just do it? And what does it do with the price? How much capacity is there? And the same will obviously, I mean, in Germany we have at the moment a relatively comfortable model where grid delays, there is at least a compensation for grid delays that is provided by the TSOs, but how does that work if other infrastructure that you're banking on now with a bid does not come online in time, and especially if that's in international infrastructure. So there's a lot to ask about these infrastructures, and that will add complexity to putting evaluation on that at this very moment. And so these are just the conclusions. There's huge opportunities, but there are, and that's why we're talking today, and that's what we're talking about, there are challenges. And that is, first of all, what historic assumptions on cost and timeline for the supply chain and the infrastructure providers is actually realistic. Then there needs to be probably a new thinking about the commercialization of the kilowatt hour, and also of the flexibilization if this build out happens in the form that it is predicted or envisaged at the moment. And then obviously then pricing in also the cross-border infrastructure that could actually have if a regulatory framework is found that will enable these, that will have also an industry impact. And so those will be some of the impacts on the that will then need to be addressed with, and that probably make it hard to really come to a definite answer on some of the questions that one might ask oneself when looking at these markets and submitting a bid for an offshore wind farm. Okay, here's just a few more slides on us and on the team, but I will end my presentation now because that was it. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Felix, for this very insightful presentation. I would say a complete overview of the supply chain of offshore wind. That's really great and very useful to have all of those information and numbers. So for the audience, now it's time for the Q&A session. You have a great opportunity to ask any question you would like to, both Joe and Felix. Please feel free to use the chat function on your right side of the control panel. And we can begin with more general question, and that will be to both of you, I would say. So we discussed quite extensively the challenges, and maybe if we can briefly say maybe top one or top two risks in the development challenge in the development of offshore wind industry. So what are the risks, and yeah, maybe if you have them, a couple of strategies to mitigate them, if possible, of course. So maybe we start with Joe first, and then Felix.
Thank you. So I guess I'll refer back to my presentation in that the one risk is the risk of breadth of insurance and insurability of offshore wind, in particular with regards to emerging technologies, not limited to floating, but also scale up. Whether the insurance market as it stands commercially can adapt to the technological changes within the sector quick enough. And one might add that although the insurance market is subject to market forces and subject to the insurance cycle, where a hard market, which is a seller's market, can eventually reverse and become a buyer's market, softer market, as it was about 6 years ago when much broader forms of insurance coverage were available. The fact of the matter is that even if that happens in maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 years' time, the industry and governments and society don't have that time to wait to build out. And the risk here is that the lack of insurability has a knock-on effect on the bankability, and therefore the build out through project finance, leveraging available equity, which is of course constrained, to the sufficient scale to both meet targets but also bring down the cost of energy through the scaling effect of new technology. So the insurance market is under constraint, and the challenge, a solution to this could be a form of state intervention, whereby government acts as maybe a reinsurer of last resort, and helps and enables gaps to be filled in what is available on the insurance market as it stands and what is required by lenders to build out the scale we're wanting to see.
Okay, thank you very much, Felix.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, thank you very much. Obviously, that's a very important point that Joe raised. I would also maybe add, I think to go at the core of what we are dealing with, I think it's not sufficiently consequential regulation that can really be a challenge to this overall scale, the scaling up to the opportunity that we're looking at the moment. I think there's a lot of momentum at the moment. It needs to be fed now with the mechanisms and the support to really realize these volumes. So this needs a lot of reliability and a lot of consensus that this is really what we want. So I think second guessing, throwing out these targets and then second guessing them is something that is a huge danger, especially when people start seeing that this is going to come also at a cost or at several costs, you know, and that relates to, you know, the environment, but also to really power like the cost of this build out, you know, and the and what that means. So I think that's one big high level risks. I think right now we are all seeing what can happen if all of a sudden the supply chain is really challenged, not only from a perspective of this scale, but also already what is there now, the steel prices, commodity prices, really putting a lot of pressure on projects that have already committed to realize, you know. So there is a certain squeeze there that is, I think, a risk. So how will that be catered for? And then obviously, I think this market development, if you now have this this problem on the commodity and supply chain side, but at the same time with the build out, the price of the product will go down, then obviously that is a significant risk for the financial models for these projects, and that could mean that that some projects that would otherwise be promising could not be realized on the parameters that they were envisaged for.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Felix. So the next question would be related to floating. We haven't touched it much during presentations yet, but can you tell any development challenges or maybe advancements on the other side in the floating offshore wind? And Felix, I know that in Germany, floating offshore industry is not maybe that developed compared to some other places such as Scotland in the UK. So any updates in this field? And maybe Felix, you will start first with your experience and expertise in Germany and around, and then we'll go to Joe.
Well, I think that's probably a better question for Joe, but I'll quickly give two thoughts on that. I think that in Germany now with the tender model, prevention of noise is a quality criterion. So maybe there is an opportunity to think about floating. There are other noiseless technologies. but that could be one opportunity to really make some headway there. And I think otherwise, apart from that, obviously floating provides for a huge opportunity to unlock areas that currently aren't accessible yet. Whether you look at more southern countries or even the high seas, it's very exciting. But probably the question of when that will be bankable is one that Joe can answer.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Felix. So, Joe?
Thank you. So just to touch on Scotland in particular, I'm mindful that Scotland, after all of the announcements, which were great news of the lease of the seabed, it is only the lease of the seabed. There are many more milestones to be met in terms of securing the grid connections to export the power, which in the north of Scotland is under constraint, having developed a project myself up there in the past. Also securing planning consent to actually have permission to build, having the necessary ports and infrastructure in place. These are all the additional potential choke points on a whole array of projects that are included within the ScotWind announcement. And then finally, reaching a final investment decision, FID, is going to be critical. And I think one of the opportunities here is that of the profile of the oil and gas majors that have entered the space, and not for the first time, I may add. And they've been in the past, and let's hope they stick around because they've got a lot of technical expertise to bring to bear. And but they also have the relationship with the upstream oil and gas energy markets in insurance world. So the opportunity is for new entrants, not just from project developers, the oil majors of the world, but the financial architecture around them from insurance world and subsequently from the lending world in banking that could enter into floating offshore wind because of the entry of oil and gas expertise. So and also I may add that the precedent I mentioned the state intervention. There's also a precedent of collective approach to insurance through the OAL Mutual, OAL, the Oil Insurance Limited company that was set up many decades ago between the oil majors, and how they share risk between them. This is an interesting precedent that could have application to floating offshore wind as well, in terms of a collective form of self-insurance of the type that we advocate ourselves, and perhaps a role for government to support that mutual, if you like, through its early years. So it's the financial architecture around the new entrants from oil and gas that I think provide the greatest opportunity to address the various challenges associated with building out the potential of ScotWind and other territories.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And that actually leads us to an array of questions regarding the oil and gas industry and also the rising costs. So maybe I can read question from the audience. So the supply chain has been losing quite some money. Actually, the person said a lot of money on offshore wind projects in the last few years, including OEM and installation contractors. Even this week, Seaway 7 issued a profit warning on OL projects. This is unsustainable, and costs will have to rise, or installation risk will have to be borne by the developers. How does the panel see this panning out? So maybe Joe this time first, and then Felix.
Okay, so happy to kick off with let's not beat around the bush here. There has been a race to the bottom, certainly in the UK under the CFD regime, whereby the project economies have been shaved as much as possible in order to win in an auction to secure the lowest level of strike price to secure your contract for difference revenue support per megawatt hour. So this has been replicated in many other territories, and it's chickens are coming home to roost. Frankly, there are challenges to the supply chain, and in terms of the contractors' experience of offshore wind, and also the aforementioned impact on insurance as well. If projects are putting together a package to present to government for revenue support under CFD that is as frankly as cheap as possible, then there's a risk that lessons are not fully being learned, and that this has knock-on effects. That I think this is a kind of beyond the scope of what we've come to present on, because it's a policy matter for government. But I think it goes hand in hand with the challenge of keeping the confidence of lenders that there is sufficient breadth of insurance cover as well for the outages that can arise, potentially through the cost savings achieved in securing a cheap enough CFD. So that's the race to the bottom that was built into the system, certainly by the UK government and others out there.
Okay, John, thank you very much. Felix?
No, it's a very good question. It's one of the key questions, you know. I mean, I must say I don't really have an answer. Like, I mean, if we had an answer for that, that would solve the puzzle to a certain extent. No, I mean, I also agree that the supply chain has to make money on these projects, and I think that. Let's say the effect of the bidding regimes having been that the supply chain is the one that's squeezed. Unfortunately, it's like that. If you look, it's also the same in the solar industry. There are other industries where that is similar, but I think we are coming to what one can say is we're coming more to a seller's market on their turf, right? I mean, right now the ability to build in a particular time window, and if we see all this build out for 2030, should be something that can be very successfully marketed. I hope that people will not be too reckless about their pricing, because then the question to the supply chain at some point will be, well, when will you tell someone that has a successful bid that you will not build that project for a price that is acceptable, or that leaves a profit margin, and whose problem is that? Should that be? You know, I mean, I think that is a little bit where it comes down. And where I think the confidence of the suppliers also needs to be exercised in the sense that they demand the prices that they need to have in order to make this a good business for them. And if that means that someone has over or underbid themselves, then that's maybe a healthy development for the market at some point. I hope it's not going to be one of my clients, but but I think it needs to somehow play out. And another point, I think, however, saying broadly the construction risk must be borne by the developer is something that really depends on who is doing this and what is the RAP. You know, I mean, I think that as a fundamental statement is a little bit too broad, and we must also see one thing. I think not only the supply chain has really been squeezed, but also the margins for the equity investors have really been under pressure. So I think it has been the industry has jointly, and I guess that's what the regulators want, right? They put this competitive bid processes in so that everybody really squeezes to the point where you're saying, well, do you really want to do this business? And that is what has happened. And yeah, but I mean, I probably agree that we need to, or everybody needs to make sure that, and it doesn't work if the supply chain doesn't make money.
I see. Great. Thank you very much. And now we have questions this time separately. First for Joy and then for Felix. So Joy, it's a quite technical question, and if it's something that you won't be able to face, it's okay, and we'll have other questions. Is the difficulty with insurance due to misunderstanding and mispricing of contractual risks in the past? If so, what can be done about that?
Two separate things here: price and breadth of insurance cover. So certainly in the past, buying insurance was relatively cheap because of the soft market, and maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the insurers weren't hurting as much as they are now, following their experience of offshore wind, as we've touched on before. And I think the aspect of having a co-insured as the contractor is relevant. I think I'll come to the point, which is that a way to address this is to have a more collective approach between project developers, insurers, and contractors in developing perhaps a mutual to certain aspects of risks out there for offshore wind, particularly in emerging offshore wind technologies such as floating and others. The assumptions that have been made in the past perhaps could be addressed more readily if a collective self-insurance supported by government via what we advocate as a hybrid discretionary mutual would engage with both the contractors, project developers, insurers, and the regulators to fill the gaps really between what's insurable and what's bankable, and whilst ensuring that all aspects of the supply chain have a sustainable experience of offshore wind and remain in the market.
Okay, thank you very much. And now a question to Felix. So the question sounds like, dear Felix, what is the LCOE of offshore wind OWF being commissioned recently in North Sea offshore, both fixed and offshore, both fixed and floating? If you have any estimates or actual numbers. So that's
well, I'm still a lawyer, right? I'm still a lawyer, so I mean, I don't know if that particular person is trying to pin me down and say, "Hey, Felix, why are you talking about so many commercial points? Do you actually know what you're talking about?" I have some ideas, but I mean, as everybody knows where I work or who my clients are, I'm not going to comment on any specific numbers. On floating, I wouldn't know because there isn't anything commissioned in Germany at the moment. This year was pretty slow when it comes to that also. So we would also have to look at is this now the project that are currently in the pipeline or which ones, and what technology are they using? But I mean, I think, and on the market intelligence, we can all look at the same reports, and I think that's published regularly. So so I'm not going to stick my head out on giving you that or on making an estimate that then would rely on just simply third-party sources. But it had, like, I mean, I think it has come down, but the question is that sustainable, right? I think what will we see? It is really, and who is taking the hit for the increase in commodity prices at this point in time will certainly determine a little bit where you allocate that cost. Also, you know, what is it for the project, or and is somebody making losses is maybe also an interesting and relevant consideration for that. But I won't go beyond this.
Okay, great. Actually, surprisingly, we have quite a lot of questions regarding the port infrastructure, supply chain, but at the same time, the time is coming to the end. We only have about 1 minute, and with respect to the time of the speakers and for the audience, I think we're going to wrap it up and say thank you very much to both our speakers today, to Felix Fischer and Joe Hulm. Very much appreciate your attendance, your presentations, bright presentations, answering all the questions. Really much appreciated. And it would be great to see all of you for our next webinar, which is scheduled on October 19th, the same time, 1 to 2 Central European Time. And that's going to be on offshore wind market updates right after this summer break. So I wish you the best to all of you. Have the great rest of the day or evening, depending where you is located. So all the best, and talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.